بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه الطيبين الطاهرين. I ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to grant us all the sincere intentions for listening to a gathering of knowledge. By this we hope to implement the saying of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, لا يشبع مؤمن من خير يسمعه حتى يكون منتهاه الجنة. The Muslim is not filled or satisfied by the amount of knowledge that he hears, in that he always wants more. He always has a thirst for knowledge, and this is a good sign. He always has a thirst for knowledge and wants to increase in his or her Islamic knowledge to then implement it. This is a good sign. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqqihhu fid din." Whomever Allah eternally willed good for, He made such a person knowledgeable in the religion of Islam, such that they would learn and then act upon that knowledge. So let's continue now, insha'Allah, speaking about Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala as we were. We left off in our previous session speaking about the fact that Allah is not a jism, and that a jism is an Arabic word that is used to describe something that has a length, a width, and a depth. Next, Shaykh Abdullah rahimahullah said, continuing explaining some of the names of Allah, وَمَعْنَى الْأَوَّلِ الَّذِي لَا ابْتِدَاءَ لِوُجُودِهِ فهو وحده الأول بهذا المعنى. He said the meaning of Al-Awwal, which is a name of Allah, is the one that has no beginning to his existence. So he is the only one who is Al-Awwal with this meaning. Sometimes people may translate or give a meaning of this name as the first. But this means the one without a beginning. The ayah in the Quran which states about Allah, هو الأول والآخر. هو الأول means he is without a beginning. And al-akhir means he is everlasting. Sometimes you might see that people translate this verse and say he is the first and the last. What this means is هو الأول والآخر, he is the only one without a beginning, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and he is the only one who is everlasting because he doesn't have a beginning. This is the meaning of هو الأول والآخر. Coincidentally, some ignorant folk said that this verse refers to Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam, They claimed it means that he is the first creation, which is not true, and that he was the last prophet to be sent. Yes, he was the last prophet to be sent, but this verse is not about Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. Continuing, وبمعناه القديم إذا أطلق على الله لأن قدم الله ذاتي وليس زمنيا. And with the same meaning, with the meaning of الأول, is the name of Allah, القديم. القديم is a name of Allah that was narrated in a mention of the 99 names of Allah. So in one of the narrations it mentions also Al-Qadim. And Allah has been attributed with being Al-Qadim also in a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. In the well-known hadith, Allahumma ذا السلطان العظيم والمن القديم ذا الرحمة الكريم. Al-Hadith. So Al-Qadim, it has the meaning of Al-Awwal, meaning the one that doesn't have a beginning. إذا أطلق على الله, if it is attributed to Allah. Because the Qidam of Allah, so Allah, one of his names being Al-Qadim, the Qidam of Allah, it is that Allah, his reality, his self, the self of Allah is without a beginning. And Qidam, it does not refer to time. Now, when we say in the Arabic language, هذه السيارة قديمة أو فلان يسكن بيتا قديما أو هذا القلم قديم جدا. Al-Qadim is usually used to refer to something that has time lapse over it. Something that is old. But when Al-Qadim is used about Allah, it's not translated as old. Allah, it is not permissible to attribute being old to Allah, just as it is not permissible to attribute being young to Allah. Being young and being old are attributes of the creation. And it is proper to attribute these attributes to creation because time lapses over us. So we can say, السيارة قديمة, the car is old. هذه الصداقة بينهما قديمة. This friendship between the two of these people, it is an old friendship. But when Al-Qadim is used about Allah, we cannot say old. Al-Qadim means the one without a beginning. وأما معنى الحي وأما معنى الحي إذا وصف الله به فهو أنه موصوف بحياة أزلية أبدية ليست بروح ولحم ودم وعصب ومخ، بل حياته صفة قديمة قائمة بذاته. So the author, rahimahullah, went on to mention the name of Allah, Al-Hayy. This means the alive, the one that is attributed with life. As for the meaning of the name of Allah, Al-Hayy, if it is attributed to Allah, as opposed to being attributed to a human being alive, As attributed to Allah, it means the one who is attributed with a life that is eternal without a beginning and everlasting. It is Allah who is attributed with an eternal and everlasting life. A life that is without soul, flesh, blood, nerves, and marrow, if you will, like bone marrow. Allah is not attributed with being or having a soul, rather, He created the souls. Likewise, flesh and blood, and so on. All of these matters, Allah is their creator, and these therefore are not attributed to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. On the contrary, His life, the attribute of life, is an attribute that is eternal and everlasting. It is eternal and it is confirmed to the self of Allah. ومعنى القيوم الدائم الذي لا يزول. The meaning of al-Qayyum is الدائم, meaning the everlasting, i.e., the one that does not cease to exist. So you have الحي القيوم, the alive, al-Qayyum, the one that does not cease to exist. وأما الدائم, as for the name الدائم, فمعناه الذي لا يلحقه ولا يجوز عليه الفناء. As for الدائم, its meaning is the one whom annihilation or ceasing to exist does not, literally it says, does not follow him, his existence, does not reach, or may say, his existence. Meaning that the existence of Allah does not come to an end. He is a da'im, i.e., the one whom it is impossible for him to stop existing. وَبِمَعْنَاهُ الْبَاقِي. And also, al-Baqi has this meaning, i.e., the everlasting, the one who will remain forever. Tabaraka wa ta'ala. فَاللَّهُ يَسْتَحِيلُ عَلَيْهِ الْفَنَاءُ عَقْلًا. Intellectually speaking, it is impossible that Allah would come to an end. Al-Fana is to cease to exist, to be destroyed, to be annihilated, to finish and be no more. It is impossible intellectually that Allah, His existence, would end. وَلَا دَائِمَ بِهَذَا الْمَعْنَى إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And there is no everlasting one with this meaning other than Allah. فلا شريك لله في الديمومية لأن ديموميته استحقها لذاته لا شيء غيره أوجب له ذلك. وأما ديمومية غيره كالجنة والنار فهي ليست ذاتية بل هما شاء الله لهما البقاء. The author said, Allah has no partner in His everlastingness. Nothing rather, Allah does not share His everlastingness with anything else. Why? Because Allah Ta'ala deserves, intellectually, it's necessary. Allah deserves everlastingness. Tabaraka wa ta'ala. It's an intellectual necessity. Istahaqqaha li dhatihi means that intellectually it is necessary that Allah would be attributed with everlastingness. And there is nothing other than Allah that gave Allah this everlastingness. No, Allah eternally, or rather intellectually, necessarily deserves everlastingness and is attributed with everlastingness. And it's not that something other than Allah gave it to him. As for the everlastingness of other than Allah, so something that is everlasting other than Allah, like paradise and like the fire of hell, then their everlastingness is not intellectually necessary. It could have been the case that hellfire or paradise, they could have come to an end. Originally, looking at paradise and hellfire and looking at the judgment of the mind that they were originally, intellectual possibilities, looking at it that way, you see that they therefore did not deserve, they did not intellectually necessarily have to exist. So now that they do exist, it's by the will of Allah. And because they are everlasting, it's because Allah gave them that everlasting nature. As for them themselves, they did not necessarily originally deserve to be everlasting, as Allah necessarily is everlasting. It's a must. It's one of the attributes of God, that God is everlasting. Rather, these two, paradise and hell, Allah eternally willed for the both of them to remain forever. أما من حيث ذاتهما فيجوز عليهما عقلا الفناء. As for paradise and hellfire, as for within the mind, originally, they are both intellectual possibilities. And so, according to that, according to their origin, their original judgment, it would have been intellectually possible for them to cease to exist. However, لكن ورد في الشرع بقاؤهما بنص القرآن والسنة النبوية وإجماع الأمة. But it was mentioned in the religious texts that paradise and hellfire would remain forever without an end. It's explicitly mentioned in the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah and the consensus of this nation, the mujtahids of this nation. ولذلك فإن القول بفنائهما أو فناء النار دون الجنة كفر. Therefore, indeed, the saying of the destruction of paradise and hell, or the ceasing to exist of paradise and hell, or the saying of the ceasing of the existence of hell while paradise remains, both these statements are kufr. To say that paradise and hellfire will both come to an end is kufr. And to say that no, only hellfire not paradise, but only hellfire will come to an end, this is also kufr. Likewise, if somebody said the other way around, if they said paradise will come to an end and hellfire won't, that's still kufr. وقد قال ابن تيمية بفناء النار بعد أن ذكر في كتابه منهاج السنة النبوية أن المسلمين اتفقوا على بقاء الجنة والنار، وأن جهم بن صفوان خالف في ذلك فقال بفنائهما فكفره المسلمون، فحكمه حكم جهم فكلاهما كافر. The author said, rahimahullah, and indeed said Ibn Taymiyah that the fire, hellfire, would cease to exist. He said that hellfire would stop existing. Wal-'iyadhu billah. Now, this is after he had mentioned in one of his books that he named Minhaj as-Sunnatin Nabawiyah. He had mentioned that the Muslims have an agreement upon the everlastingness of paradise and hell. So Ibn Taymiyyah, he first mentioned this in his book, that paradise and hellfire are everlasting. Then later on, he said that hellfire would come to an end. And he mentioned Ibn Taymiyyah. He also mentioned that Jahm ibn Safwaan had gone against the agreement of the Muslims, and that Jahm ibn Safwaan said that both paradise and hell would cease to exist. فَكَفَّرَهُ الْمُسْلِمُونَ, and that the Muslims called Jahm ibn Safwaan a kafir. So our Shaykh said, فَحُكْمُهُ حُكْمُ جَهْمٍ. So the same goes for Ibn Taymiyyah, because he denied the everlastingness of hellfire. His judgment is the judgment of Jahm. So both of them are a kafir. So both of them are kuffar or kafirani. Jahm ibn Safwan, it's important that we mention who he is. But before him, Ibn Taymiyah. Ibn Taymiyah, people refer to him as Shaykhul Islam. One of the scholars said, whoever refers to Ibn Taymiyah as Shaykhul Islam, and they know of his misguidances, where he belied the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and he belies the Quran, and he attributes Allah with what is an insult to Allah. Whoever calls Ibn Taymiyyah Shaykhul Islam, then this person is actually a kafir. Because Ibn Taymiyyah is not Shaykhul Islam. But for many things, he went against the Muslim scholars in the Quran and the Hadiths. So that's Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah, whom the Wahhabiyya today aggrandize and glorify. Ibn Taymiyah, wala hawla wala quwwata illa billah. A huge fitna, trial and corruption in this nation. Ibn Taymiyah al-Harrani. As for Jahm ibn Safwan, ironically, the Wahhabiyya today call call Ahl al-Sunnati wal Jama'ah Jahmiyyah. They call the Asha'ira, the Ash'aris, who are Ahl al-Sunnah, who are Muslims, they call them non-Muslims, and they throw this word Jahmiyyah at them. So let's look at who Jahm ibn Safwan actually was. Jahm bin Safwaan. This person here, Abu Mihraz or Mihriz perhaps, Rasibi as-Samarqandi. This person, perhaps he was born in Samarkand in Uzbekistan, Usud Dalala wa Ra'sul Jahmiyyah. He is like the mother of falsehood. And he was the leader of the Jahmiyyah. They were named after him. Jahm, Jahmiyyah. He was a kafir. How? He negated, he rejected the attributes of Allah. He said, and this is kufr, he said Allah is not attributed with attributes. This is kufr. And he said that the kalam of Allah, which we know is not a language or a letter or a sound, he said that this is a creation, this is created. Wal-'iyadhu billah. And he said that Allah exists in all places. This is Jahm bin Safwaan, someone who we consider to be a misguided person, a kafir even. So it's baseless for the Wahhabiyya, the so-called Salafiyya, to call us Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah Jahmiyya, because we call Jahm a kafir. They call us Jahmiyya wal-'iyadhu billah, because they say, well, Jahm ibn Safwan, he rejected the attributes of Allah. And they say, you people also, you Ash'aris, they say, you also reject the attributes of Allah. When they say that, you know what they mean? They say that because you don't take the ayahs about Allah in the Quran literally, then that makes you people who are rejecting the attributes of Allah. They'll say, because you don't say about Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arshi istawa that it means Allah is above, because you guys don't say that, then you're rejecting an attribute of Allah. They'll say, because you don't say about Allah that He has two right hands, which they claim is in the Quran, they'll say, well, you're rejecting an attribute of Allah. They'll say, if you don't say Allah literally, if you don't say about Him that He has fingers, as they claim is mentioned in a supposed in a hadith, they'll say, well, if you don't affirm that, then you are rejecting the attributes of Allah, so you are Jahmiyyah. They say you are Jahmiyyah. And this was something that Ibn Taymiyah came up with. And the Wahhabiyya revived it to call the people of truth Jahmiyyah. When we've seen, we've dissected the matters in which, some of the matters in which Jahm ibn Safwan was heavily mistaken, and that caused him to fall into kufr. Wal-'iyadhu billah. Okay. The author said, while we're here, let's read about Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah, he is Ahmad ibn Abd al-Halim. Ibn Taymiyyah al-Harrani al-Dimashqi. He was born in Harran in the year 661 after al-Hijrah. Then he moved to Damascus. ظهرت منه بدع كثيرة حتى قال الحافظ أبو زرعة العراقي إنه خرق الإجماع في أكثر من 60 مسألة، بعضها في الأصول وبعضها في الفروع. Many innovations of misguidance appeared at the hands of Ibn Taymiyyah, such that Al-Hafiz Abu Zur'ah al-Iraqi said that Ibn Taymiyyah tore the consensus in more than 60 cases. He breached the consensus of the mujtahids in more than 60 cases. Things that all the Muslims said is like this. He said, no, it's some other way. Some of these cases were in the matters of creed, aqidah, and some of them were in the branches. وقال فيه علمه أكبر من عقله. Abu Zur'at al-Iraqi, rahimahullah, said, the knowledge of Ibn Taymiyah was bigger than his mind. Meaning he didn't understand what he was reading. He didn't understand what he was being told. He didn't understand what he was memorizing. سوء الفهم بلاء كبير. Having bad understanding is a huge hardship. رد عليه علماء عصره وبدعوه وألفوا في ذلك. The scholars of his time refuted him, and they branded him as being an innovator. And they authored about that. كالسبكي فإنه صنف شفاء السقام في زيارة خير الأنام والاعتبار ببقاء الجنة والنار في الرد عليه. الحافظ المجتهد تقي الدين علي بن عبد الكافي السبكي, he narrated 2 books. A mujtahid, he wrote 2 books against Ibn Taymiyah. One of them was this book, شفاء السقام في زيارة خير الأنام, which literally means the cure of illnesses in visiting the best of creation. Meaning, this was a book warning against the saying of Ibn Taymiyyah that it was haram to intend to visit the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So As-Subki wrote a book against him. And another book, والاعتبار ببقاء الجنة والنار. Then he wrote a book which means الاعتبار, either the reliance upon the saying of the everlastingness of paradise and hell, or the correct consideration is given to this saying of the remaining everlastingness of paradise and hell. Because Ibn Taymiyyah, he said that hell would come to an end. So this is a matter in which there is no valid difference of opinion. Sometimes some of the Wahhabiyya might say to you, well, there is a difference in opinion about the coming to end of hell or everlastingness of hell. No, there is no difference of opinion. Allah revealed in the Quran, in many places in the Quran, خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا, that they will remain in it forever. And in some verses, خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا أَبَدًا, they will remain in it forever. أُسْتُتِيبَ عدة مرات. They judged Ibn Taymiyyah as a kafir, and they ordered him to return to Islam. وكان في كل مرة ينقض عهوده ومواثيقه حتى حبس بفتوى من قضاة المذاهب الأربعة سنة 726 بالقلعة، ومات فيها سنة 728. And every time he would say that he's a Muslim, he would say the Shahada. He even wrote on one occasion, I am an Ash'ari. Then they let him go. And then they'd find him again in secluded gatherings, teaching his ill creeds. So every time he would break his promises until he was incarcerated by the decree of the judges from the 4 schools in the year 726. He was imprisoned in a castle, and then he died in 728, 2 years later. These are some of the books in which you can find this historical information. The author said, قال المؤلف رحمه الله الخالق الرازق العالم القدير الفعال لما يريد ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشأ لم يكن. The author said, these are names of Allah, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And then, whatever Allah wills to be shall be, and whatever Allah did not will to be shall not be. الشرح معنى الخالق الذي أبدع وكون جميع الكائنات وأبرزها من العدم إلى الوجود، فلا خلق بهذا المعنى إلا لله، فما سوى الله تعالى حدث بخلقه تعالى وتكوينه وإبداعه. So here the author said, explanation. The meaning of al-Khaliq, the creator, is the one that, then abda'a and kawwana. Both of these words mean to create. The one that created all of those matters that came into existence. He is the one that brought them from non-existence into existence. So there is no creating with this meaning except for Allah. It is not attributed, this meaning of creating, to bring from non-existence into existence, this meaning of creating is not attributed to anyone but Allah. And what is other than Allah, okay, what is other than Allah, meaning the universe, may Allah be exalted, what is other than Allah occurred by the creating of Allah, the exalted. Again, by the creating. These are synonymous. فالخلق هو الإبراز من العدم إلى الوجود ولا خالق إلا الله. So creating means to bring from non-existence, al-adam, to existence. And there is no creator, ولا خالق إلا الله. There is no creator but Allah. قال الله تعالى قل الله خالق كل شيء. Say, O Muhammad, alayka salatu wassalam, Allah is the creator of everything. And thing here, والشيء يشمل الأجسام والأعمال. Here, Allah is the creator of every shay, everything. Thing here, shay, includes bodies and the deeds. So Allah created both. وقال والله خلقكم وما تعملون. Allah created you and what you do, your deeds. فالآيتان صريحتان في أن الله هو خالق الأجسام والأعمال. So the two ayahs are both explicit in conveying the meaning that Allah, He is the creator of bodies and the deeds and the actions. The deeds. ومعنى الرازق الذي يوصل الأرزاق إلى عباده. And the meaning of الرازق is the one that makes reach the sustenance to his slaves. ومعنى العالم المتصف بالعلم فالله موصوف بعلم أزلي أبدي لا يتغير لا يزداد ولا ينقص فهو عالم لا كالعلماء لأن علم غيره حادث. The meaning of the name of Allah, Al-Alim, is the one that is attributed with knowledge. So Allah is attributed with an eternal without a beginning and everlasting without an end knowledge. So Allah is attributed with an eternal and everlasting knowledge that does not change. It does not increase. Allah doesn't learn new things. وَلَا يَنْقُص, and the knowledge of Allah doesn't decrease. Allah doesn't forget things. So Allah is alim. Allah knows. لَا كَالْعُلَمَاء, not like things that know, creations that know. Our knowledge changes, it increases and decreases. لأن علم غيره حادث, because the knowledge of other than Allah, it came into existence. It is therefore weak, because it's in need of the one that gave it that existence, and that one is Allah. ومعنى القدير المتصف بالقدرة التامة، وهي صفة أزلية أبدية يؤثر الله أو يؤثر بها في الممكنات، أي في كل ما يجوز في العقل وجوده وعدمه. بها يوجد ويعدم، وبمعناه القادر، إلا أن القدير أبلغ. The meaning of Al-Qadir is the one that is attributed with absolute power, perfect power, complete power. And it is an eternal without a beginning and everlasting without an end attribute by which Allah creates, by which Allah brings things into existence from the intellectual possibilities, i.e., everything that the mind judges can exist, and it's possible that it doesn't exist. All of these things we say Allah Ta'ala, His power relates to. So it is with His power, Al-Qudra, that Allah brings things into existence and takes things out of existence. وَبِمَعْنَاهُ الْقَادِرِ, and also Al-Qadir, its meaning is like that of Al-Qadir. إِلَّا أَنَّ الْقَدِيرَ أَبْلَغ. Except that Al-Qadir, it carries more of a meaning. In a sense, more of a meaning. ومعنى الفعال لما يريد, the meaning of الفعال لما يريد, أنه يكون ما سبقت به إرادته لا يعجزه عن ذلك شيء يفعل ما يشاء بلا مشقة ولا يمانعه أحد ولا يحتاج إلى استعمال آلة وحركة ولا إلى استعانة بغيره ولا تخلف لمراده. The meaning of Al-Fa'al lima yurid, i.e., the one that does whatever he wills, is that Allah creates whatever He has eternally willed. Nothing prevents or can prevent Allah from doing that. He does whatever He wills without any difficulty. And again, no one prevents Allah from doing that. And Allah does not require, does not need to use an instrument or likewise a movement. Allah is not attributed with being still or moving. And Allah does not need anyone's help. And whatever Allah wills to be shall be. وَلَا تَخَلُّفَ لِمُرَادِهِ, meaning that whatever Allah has willed, it will always be. It's never going to be the case that Allah has eternally willed something and then it didn't happen. No. وَمَعْنَى مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ كَانَ وَمَا لَمْ يَشَأْ لَمْ يَكُنْ أن كل ما شاء الله في الأزل أن يكون كان. The meaning of this statement, ما شاء الله. Like when we say ما شاء الله, referring to when we see something that we like, we might say, oh, ما شاء الله. What does that mean? Literally, it means whatever Allah wills. But it has a latent meaning, a hidden meaning. A meaning, the words of which are not there. It actually means ما شاء الله كان. Whatever Allah wills to be shall be. Okay? So whatever Allah wills to be shall be. And whatever He did not will to be will not be. Its meaning, ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشأ لم يكن, is that everything that Allah willed eternally without a beginning, that it would be, would be. And whatever Allah did not will eternally to be, it will not be. وَلَا تَتَغَيَّرُ مَشِيئَتُهُ. The will of Allah does not change, because change is a sign of weakness, a sign of being in need, and Allah needs no one. لأن تغير المشيئة دليل الحدوث. So the will of Allah does not change, because the changing of one's will is a sign of being created, of having a beginning, of being in need. وَالْحُدُوثُ مُسْتَحِيلٌ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And having a beginning, being created, it's impossible that Allah would be attributed with that. فهو على حسب مشيئته الأزلية يغير المخلوقات من غير أن تتغير مشيئته. So according to the will of Allah, which is not bound by time, which is without a beginning and without an end, according to the will of Allah, changes are made within the creations. Allah makes changes in the creations according to His eternal will, without His will changing. الشرح. قال المؤلف رحمه الله: الذي لا حول ولا قوة إلا به الموصوف بكل كمال يليق به المنزه عن كل نقص في حقه ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. Explanation. The meaning of لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله is الشرح. معنى لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله لا حول عن معصية الله إلا بعصمة الله. It means that no one has the strength to stay away from disobeying Allah except by the protection of Allah. No one has the strength to stay away from sins except by the protection of Allah. وَلَا قُوَّةَ عَلَى طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا بِعَوْنِ اللَّهِ. And no one has the power again or the strength to obey Allah except by the help of Allah. So, this shows you the reality of the slave, the reality of one of us. If we want to do good, we can't unless Allah has willed it. So we need Allah. And if one of us wants to stay safe from sin, we cannot unless Allah has protected us. So in both situations, we are completely in need of Allah. This is why we rely on Allah. We surrender ourselves to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. We submit to Allah. If we are protected from sin, it's because Allah willed it. We should be thankful. If we are given the ability to do good and Allah rewards us for it, it's because Allah created it, because Allah eternally willed for us to do that. لا إله إلا الله كما ورد ذلك في الحديث الصحيح الذي رواه البزار. Just as this was narrated, this exact meaning was narrated in a hadith, a sahih hadith, narrated by Al-Bazzar. والله تعالى موصوف بكل كمال يليق به. Allah the Exalted, and Ta'ala doesn't mean the most high in place, because Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is high but in status. He is exalted, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Wallahu Ta'ala mawsufun. Allah the Exalted is attributed with every perfection that befits Him. Every attribute of perfection that befits Allah. إنما قيدت هذه العبارة بلفظ يليق به لأن الكمال إما أن يكون كمالا في حق الله وفي حق غيره كالعلم، أو لا كالوصف بالجبار، مدح في حق الله وذم في حق الإنسان. The reason why this statement, the previous statement, was restricted by the statement يليق به, reason why we said that Allah is attributed with every attribute of perfection that befits Him, the reason why we said that befits Him, يليق به, is that perfection, it is sometimes perfection when we say it about Allah and when we say it about the creation, like ilm. If you attribute someone with knowledge, a person, then this is a praise for them. Okay? If you attribute knowledge to Allah, you say Allah is attributed with knowledge. Then here, this is an attribute of Allah. That is an attribute of perfection. Or it might be the case that you say something about Allah and it's an attribute of perfection, but for a human it is not. Like attributing Allah with Al-Jabbar, saying Allah is Al-Jabbar. This is an attribute of Allah, which is a praise of Allah. But if that same word, okay, obviously with a different meaning, if that same word is now said about a human being, it has a negative connotation. Because Al-Jabbar, when said about a human, it means the unjust. وكالوصف برجاحة العقل هو مدح في حق الإنسان ولا يجوز أن يوصف الله بذلك. And as for having a well-calibrated mind, as for being attributed with having a sound mind, or a mind that judges well, this is a praise for a human being, but it's not permissible to attribute Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala with it. فكما أنه تعالى متصف بكل كمال في حقه فهو منزه عن كل نقص، أي ما لا يليق به تعالى كالجهل والعجز واللون والحد. So just as Allah the Exalted is attributed with every attribute of perfection, just like that, Allah is exalted, free of any attribute that is considered a defect, i.e., what does not befit Him, the Exalted Ta'ala. He is free of it. Like what? Like ignorance. This does not befit Allah. Like al-ajaz, weakness. Like being attributed with a color. This does not befit Allah. Like having a limit, weakness. Yani this does not befit Allah. والتحيز في المكان, and like being confined to a place. Allah exists without a place. Allah is not in one place or everywhere. So to attribute a place to Allah, this is something that does not befit Allah. Wal jiha. Likewise, if someone attributed a direction to Allah, like they said Allah is above us, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, then they have attributed something that is non-befitting to Allah. لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله. When we say لا إله إلا الله, we are negating these non-befitting attributes from Allah. When we say La ilaha illallah, we are saying, what this means is that we are saying Allah is not ignorant. Allah is not weak. Allah is not attributed with color. Allah is not attributed with having a limit. Allah is not attributed with being in a place or a direction. I think we'll stop here today. Inshallah. Does anybody have a question about what we mentioned today? You said, someone said that when the Prophet ﷺ went above to the seven heavens to meet with Allah, then this means that Allah is above. What do we say? Well, here we say that this statement, it is something that is not mentioned in the Quran or the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, that that Allah went, or rather the Prophet went to meet Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. This has not been mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith. So Where has that statement been taken from? That's where I would start off with a person who considers themselves to be scholastic even. Where is this statement mentioned? It's not mentioned anywhere. So it's something that the people assume. So you say to them, Allah revealed in the Quran, سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا. The first ayah of Surah Al-Isra says that Allah took the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the night journey, and also this goes for the Mi'raj as well. Why? لِنُرِيَهُ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا, so that Allah would show the Prophet great signs of the power of Allah. So that he would show him great signs of the power of Allah. And it didn't say to supposedly meet Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. You say to them, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, أَقْرَبُ مَا يَكُونُ الْعَبْدُ مِنْ رَبِّهِ وَهُوَ سَاجِدٌ. That if this ayah, if this surah is taken, if this hadith is taken literally, it would mean that one is closest to his Lord when one is in sajda. So does that mean that Allah is in the ground? No, this is interpreted. As for this statement that the Prophet went to meet Allah, forget about interpreting something. It doesn't even exist in the religious texts. So that statement is not true. How did he die? He died in prison. He died in prison. Okay, barakallahu fikum. Let's stop there today. MashaAllah. Let's say La ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. بارك الله بكم. Insha'Allah ta'ala, next time we can begin inshallah from here. Okay. Barakallahu fikum. Is there any translation of this book? Not that I know of, unfortunately. Not an official translation of the book, no. I don't know if Sheikh Ra'id did one. Maybe someone can ask him. I'm not sure. Allah yubarik fikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.